Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. So the idea of this session is I'm going to walk you through a technique and a framework to map DAO. So I share the link in the comments. The idea is that you guys can use this board. You can pick one of the many canvases that are there and start working with it. So I'm going to start first by giving you an overview of how this works. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. Ask questions, just unmute yourselves, make some noise, say, hey, sorry, blah, blah. I usually talk a lot, so really feel free to interrupt me whenever I'm just rambling on if you don't understand anything, any clarifying questions, any comments, any ideas. And so if we do this well, in roughly half an hour, I would have given you an overview of how this works. And then we have time for either you to pick one of the canvases and start mapping out an organization that you have, or otherwise ask specific questions about how different sections or different blocks can be designed. So as I'm saying, the idea here is that we can map an organization and we can map it at anywhere on its journey of decentralization. Or you can have something that's more DAO or less DAO. I'll leave the argument about definitions outside this topic. But it's more to say that if you understand what are the fundamental building blocks that make an organization and make it work, it essentially gives you a list of all the things that need to work well for the organization to work well. So it's as much an assessment tool of where you're at, as well as a roadmap of where you want to go and how you can improve. So generally, we have these 2 pages. Is divided in a series of sections, and in all of them, you can map what's the current state, what would be ideal, and do we have any blockers to move towards that. So that's kind of the part of the roadmap. The usual approach is you start with the current state. So you can go and add a post-it here and say, for example, the guiding question, how does this work? What is it that we're doing? And is how might we, I don't know, send people to the moon, pay our employees well, and provide at least 10x ROI to investors. So we started here with a question, and then you go actually, or let's say our purpose is something way simpler, like send people to the moon or something like that. So you're using a more outdated framework or whatever, and you want to move to something multi-stakeholder that considers the different people. So you might have the different ideas. And then you might see if there are any blockers. So as I'm saying, I'll explain the sections and how to use each of the sections in a second. But this just to give you an overview of how generally you navigate the canvas. Any questions or comments at this stage? Hearing some noise, I guess someone is unmuted. Yep. All right. So the way this works is we have alignment and identity. So there's our different functions that serve that purpose. And things related to member experience, then related to value creation, value distribution, then related to strategy and organization. So how are you organizing? How are you deciding priorities? Operations, the day-to-day running of things, and then a section around governance. So for alignment and identity, the first bit is like what's the mission statement or purpose, or ultimately what's the ultimate goal of the organization. And because an organization only exists as people can satisfy their needs better together than they could in isolation. So generally, that's what I refer here. You have the different stakeholders. So you'll have the founders, the employees, the investors, the users, et cetera, that are coming together, and they have different needs that they want to satisfy. And So that creates a question of how can we satisfy these needs, and that's the definition of purpose that I use. But different people might use different definitions of why this organization exists, and you can simply add that one there. Then once you have these quests, this mission, this purpose, this guiding question, then you're going to have an answer to that. So for example, if the mission is like how might we send people to the moon, et cetera, then the answer to that can be something like we're going to create a company that can create rockets very cheap, or we're going to create a DAO that can coordinate a lot of people to build rockets in Kenya, whatever it is, right? Like, so that's your vision. That's kind of the answer to the question, the answer to the purpose. The vision is a hypothesis of how you might answer that question, and then you're going to go and try to build that vision and see if that vision is answering the question. Then as you're doing that, you want to know whether you're succeeding, whether you're indeed building your vision and you're indeed satisfying the needs of your stakeholders. So to know that, you can then use a series of KPIs or OKRs, or anyway, a series of indicators, essentially a series of metrics that are going to help you to know whether you're doing that. And as well, you use, so these are somewhat like quantitative control measures to align people, to give a sense of priorities, to give a sense of what's important. And then you will have qualitative things, which is what do we value? What are the principles? And so generally, this refers to whenever there is a decision to make, if I have two desirable options, how do I choose between them? And that's what your values should essentially provide you the answer to. It should give you some guiding principles to make decisions by saying these are the things we all agreed we value. So then we have a decision. If there is one that upholds those values, one option that upholds those values, and another option that doesn't uphold those values, well, you know which one to choose. Equally, the important thing about the values is that they're really specific to the organization. Like if every organization in your industry or in the space that you're in, let's say you are in some climate change startup thing, if you put there regeneration, you're essentially like every other startup in that area. So it's not really going to add any new information. What you want to do is really express a point of view, express what's creating the specific identity of your organization, the specific culture, the specific values, the specific beliefs, etc. So the more concrete you can be with those things, the more useful those values are going to be. As opposed to if you put things like collaboration, it's like, okay, but do you really believe in collaboration? Like, are you going to apply these in a very specific way in that you're going to be choosing between options? Or are you just saying it because it's a nice thing? And that allows you to understand whether the values are useful or they're just not, writing on the wall. Then on the member experience, so you're probably building some sort of community, etc., or at least attracting different talent and people that you're going to mobilize as part of this organization. And the question is who they are. So what do they have in common? What are the profiles, etc.? And you can add a couple of things here about them. Then how do you actually attract them, select and onboard the members? So obviously, each of these things you could write a couple of pages about. But here, at least, you can get just a like very high level view of where this is at. It's like, okay, we're going to onboard them through Discord. We're going to onboard them through this little course. We're going to onboard them through an onboarding team that has that job, and they're going to be operating it. So you get the high level view. Then the levels of membership. So this usually relates to this sort of onboarding funnel, but it's understanding what are the different types of membership to an organization and how do those work. So you will have, in general, in an organization, people who observe, people who interact, and people who create. So you will have your Twitter followers. They are just consuming information. Then you have other people who are engaging with you, who at least are liking, retweeting, who are commenting, who join your Discord, who start being part of your community in that sense. So they're not just your audience; they start to be part of the community. They're maybe chatting with other people in your platform, etc. And then finally, you will have more the core people who are part of creating the thing, and you can do more or less the same thing with all the different areas, whether it's financial involvement. So you'll have people who follow your token price, people who start buying your tokens, and people who are actually way more involved in trying to make decisions on how to increase the value of the token, for example. Or if you have a product, you'll have some people watching it from a distance. You'll have some people giving you comments. You'll have people getting very actively involved in trying to co-create that product or co-create that offering, or something related to it. Same thing with the governance. You'll have people who look at it from the outside. You have people who comment, who start to get a little bit involved, and you have others who are going all the way and trying to propose new things, trying to drive change, etc. So you can define those levels of membership based on ultimately what is useful for you to distinguish. And then how are you going to nurture a good vibes, a good culture? So what is the sort of atmosphere that you actually want to create, and what work are you actually going to put in to make that happen? And are you doing anything in this regard or not? Anything related to well-being as well, you could put in there. Then over value. So here we're really talking about the business models. How is the value created? Then how is the value accrued by the project? So essentially, here the question is, how are you making revenue? This is where the first generation of NFT projects miserably failed. So they were like, oh yeah, we're going to create a community and people are going to buy the NFT. Okay, great. So you generate a little bit of revenue, but then ongoingly, how was actually the project capturing any of the ongoing value created in the community? And there was no answer. So all of these projects shut down after a bit because there was no inflows of value into the project that then could be invested for the ongoing maintenance and development of the project. So those a lot of those kind of like slowly decline on top of the bubble effect. But ultimately, that was a big part of the issue. And then how is the value distributed to participants? So you'll have your workers or your governors or your whoever else, investors, etc., like your different members who are involved in the project. And this is going to vary a little bit from each of them. But you want to see what sort of behaviors you want to incentivize and how are you going to be doing that. So here is, for example, okay, the contributors get paid in tokens or the contributors get paid in fiat. And you're going to assess that through some sort of monthly appraisal of peer-to-peer appraisal, or you're going to create some salary tiers, the traditional Web2 way, or you're going to give rewards for every bounty, or whatever it is. But essentially, what is the model to distribute value to the different participants? And have you got one? Then coming to strategy and organization. So the question is there, how is the structure decided? So what this refers to is you're gonna divide an organization in different pieces. In a traditional tech startup, you will have like the developers on one side, then you'll have the product team, maybe together with the designers, and then you're gonna have a growth team and operations team. So deciding that division is an extremely impactful decision. Sorry. In other organizations, you're going to divide things differently. So the question is how you as a group decide how things are divided. Is it just the founder who decides top down, at which point you're essentially operating with a traditional management approach? Is it the community that proposes work groups and that is approved by some sort of collective vote? Or how are you going to do it? And this is precisely because it's that defines the way you define the groups is the way you define the work that is prioritized. So essentially, whenever you create a group for something and give it a theme, you're prioritizing that type of work. So if you create a marketing team, you're going to prioritize marketing. If you create a community team, you're going to prioritize community, and so on. And so the question is, how are you evolving that structure? Then the other big lever for decision making, for strategy, etc., whether an organization is centralized or decentralized, is how are you allocating funds. So how are those decisions made? And that's primarily allocation of funds to work groups, whether those are permanent teams or temporary teams like projects and so on. But that's the big question there. And then how is work allocating? So this is essentially who gets to do what. So there is a piece of work that needs to be done. You kind of decided here that you're going to create a marketing team. Here you decided some mechanism through which you're going to give funding to the marketing team. And then finally, you need to decide, okay, so who's the marketing team? Who gets to be the marketing team? Do you have an election process? Do you have a top-down appointment process? Do you have some sort of contest? And the person that wins that contest then becomes the marketing person? Or how are you going to do it? Then I'm assuming there are no questions, so I'm going to just keep on going. Then on operations, you want to decide what are the platforms, what are the places where you are communicating. So this can be, okay, we're going to have a monthly AMA, or other than that, we're going to be using Discord, and we're going to have a forum for governance conversations, etc., etc. Or whatever, or we're going to have a Telegram group where everyone is just shouting at each other because there's 1,000 people in the same group. Great. So you put these, how and where you're communicating and where you're keeping your documentation. And it's especially important at the beginning if you want to spark new groups. And what is very often underestimated in DAOs is how much time it takes to set this up. And so you end up with a lot of teams, each team spending maybe even 2, 3, 4 days back and forth discussing where they're going to keep their documents. So like, oh, we're going to have a Google Drive, or we're going to have a Notion, or we're going to put it in HackMD, or whatever it is. And when you don't have these standardized solutions and proper training to onboard people to the different tools, you can end up with an absolute mess. Then, anyway, what do we use to store, manage, and transfer funds? So this is very much like the financial infrastructure. So you're going to have a multi-sig, or we're going to have some sort of governor contract, Zeppelin stuff, etc. That's going to be our on-chain treasury, or whatever it is. What are you going to use to actually be holding the financial assets and to be moving them around? And here, one of the critical questions is around treasury. So if you have raised some funds or have a pot of capital, then most of that capital is sitting there for some time. Are you simply going to be leaving it there, let's say in the DAO contract, or can you give this to a team that can allocate it in a more agile manner? Or so whether it's for treasury management or paying salaries every month, etc. And that's usually the question here is one in between balancing safety and community governance on one side, and on the other side, balancing agility and responsiveness and essentially low overhead to be able to execute on operational things very quickly. So if you say, oh, the token, the price of Bitcoin is gone down, let's transfer some of our USDC to Bitcoin very quickly, and then you actually need 5 days of a community vote. By the time that community vote has happened, probably the price has moved and it's no longer worthwhile to make that transfer. But on the other side, if you give all of that to an individual, maybe they decide to transfer the money to themselves and they disappear into an island and you never see them again. So those are kind of like the considerations that you have to figure out. Then the critical thing here is in the course of work, this is about having teams. So before we were talking about our marketing team. So one thing is when you're going to have meta governance, or like governance at the level of the umbrella, of the big level of the whole organization. And another thing is when you have governance at micro scale. So does the button of the product you're building goes to the right or goes to the left? Is it pink or is it yellow? So all of these kind of day-to-day regular decisions that are being made, they also need their own decision-making model. And you can have, okay, I'm going to appoint the marketing lead to decide on marketing decisions, and this person can delegate to others. That's a traditional model. There is many other different models that you can use based on consent, based on whatever you want. Earlier DAOs, they thought that they could decide absolutely everything through direct democracy. That's a disaster. So a lot of so-called DAOs these days, they just go back to traditional top-down management, and that has a whole bunch of issues that are very well known. And there are more progressive options that are actually better than either of those two. So that's the question: is when you have smaller teams, how are you making regular decisions? And then on the other side is the intangible assets. So this is mostly about IP, knowledge, etc. So if you have some specific know-how or information that is proprietary to the organization that is special, or you have assets like, let's say, your logo and your brand, and how do people get access to that? Can anyone use your logo and put in a communique and say this is an official communique, or do you have certain guidelines? Do you have certain approval processes? Do you have certain barriers to that? Who gets to decide on those decisions? These are the sort of things that you're contemplating here. And that brings us to the last section on governance, and is how and who accrues governance power. So essentially, who gets to make decisions at the meta governance level, at the umbrella level, and how are they accruing that power? Conflict resolution. So whenever you have a conflict, what are you going to do about it? Insert here conflict resolution policy. Then what's the legal structure, if any? So what's your interface with the legacy legal system? And when you want to change these things, when you want to change the way you're making decisions, etc., how do you do it? So how do you update your governance system or constitution, which is what we're calling meta governance? So that is it. That is an overview of the canvas. I've gone very quickly through the whole thing, but the idea is that now, if you guys want, there is a good 45 minutes for you to try it out, ask questions, dig around, and if not, then we'll leave it at this. So I'm gonna shut up now, and if anyone has any question, feel free to unmute yourselves and go for it.
Yeah, I think a lot more questions will surface as people start to actually complete the canvas. It all sounded very clear now that you were presenting it, but then as you go through the slots and fill them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, if you guys want, if you don't know how to use Miro, I put the link in the chat. But if you, let me put it there as again, and feel free to start going through it. Let me see the second time they put the link right. Yes. So feel free to pick one of the canvas and give it a try. Like, try to map an organization you're involved in and see if you can do it. See how it goes.
Gekid, you're gonna ask something? We can see you on video now.
Just have an issue with connection. I just had a question. A generic question. I'm not an expert in marketing, in communications, in organizations, in any of that. But the approach you took, it seems like similar to what traditional organizations operate already. There's a brand identity, there's a vision, there is how decisions are made. My question is, what sets this really apart from other models of organization or brand building or DAO building, or I don't know how you put it. I'm not sure if I was clear in my question.
Yeah, so this is not specific to DAOs. This is specific to organizations, so way broader than DAOs. Precisely, the idea is you could try to create a formula of what the DAO means. And what that formula would be specific answers that you put in these boxes. So here you can map any type of organization. You can assess how that organization is doing. The boxes that are there, they're all fundamental properties of organization. If you're missing any of those, you're gonna have this organization. But the way you're answering those questions, the way you're going about them, can be more DAO or less DAO. So you can create a mission statement the traditional way, or you can do it the DAO way. And the DAO way can have multiple different answers. So if there is a specific box that you would be like, oh, how can we do this better than traditional organizations? Then we can discuss, well, better for what? And then I can give you a lot of context and answers and ideas on how that could be. But the model itself is purposely designed to be general, while ensuring that a lot of the critical questions are there. Whether you're trying to create something, a very post-capitalistic radical DAO, or something that is more, let's say, DAO in name only, you can still map it with the same canvas. It's just the answer in the boxes is going to be very different in one case or the other.
I appreciate your answer. And just a follow-up question, which is, do you follow any particular theory?
So this is largely based on the viable system model. One of the issues of the viable system model that is based on cybernetics, but it's including a whole bunch of other theories and mixes there. There is elements that have been informed by understanding of polycentric governance. There is elements that have to do with self-determination theory, and a bunch of other bits and bobs, as well as just regular practices of organizations and consultants that are included. It's mixing over 40 or 50 references. Now, the purpose here is not to create the most academically rigorous or comprehensive list. You could make these canvas 10 times bigger with more questions. So there was a lot of what I would say design considerations of trying to simplify things, dumb them down, eliminate certain things that were important but perhaps not as critical when you're just trying to get this overview of an organization. And a lot of those are more art than science, if you like. It's just an educated judgment of whether those questions should be removed or left, based on my experience, which is a little bit over 10 years doing organization design, innovation management in Web3 since 2017, 18, always in DAOs and so on. I can drop you a link more about my experience if you're interested, but that's kind of like a talk for another day, maybe. And yeah, there you go.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And people in the earlier days of DAOs always thought okay, building these new kinds of organizations, so we have to do everything differently. But actually, no, you need to follow a lot of the best practices of organizations from the past, and you need to answer all of these questions that organizations in the past had to answer. You can't just get rid of everything and do everything completely different.
Exactly. So there is a lot we can change at the tactical level, but at the fundamental functions of an organization, do you still need to coordinate and make decisions? Yes. Otherwise, you're not an organization. Otherwise, you're maybe a marketplace at best, where individual actors who don't coordinate between them make decisions about purchasing and selling stuff. Sure, you can do that. That's a marketplace. That's not an organization. You want to design an organization, you need to have a way to make decisions together. Otherwise, you're not organizing by definition.
Right. And you still need to make money. You can't live off of vibes, which is what a lot of DAOs thought in the previous cycle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, I'm part of an organization called Sandbox, and it's a member-owned community. It was a community for young leaders or something like that was started 15 years ago. Or they raised investment by a VC. They grew. Then the VC got into an argument with the community, and everyone left and created a new Facebook group. And suddenly the VC didn't own the community anymore. It was a self-owned community. And these guys been maybe for the past 8 years or so surviving based on member commitment only. No one pays anything to the organization, but there is still a very important form of value creation. This community really cares about being together. There is a lot of people who have received over the years a lot from the community. And so whenever they see a gap, they step up and they volunteer to organize a chapter and organize local events. And people are extremely giving to new members by culture. So then that kind of perpetuates that cycle where the new members are like, oh my God, I received so much for the past 2 years. Now the community needs me. Let me go and organize a thing. As well as a cultural thing where a lot of these people want to network with each other. So there is value in them being the organizer of events because they become more visible in the community. And so it's good for networking. But then it has all kind of issues where the organizers are always a little bit burnt out, always spread too thin. There is always fears that no one is going to step up for the next chapter. And that happens occasionally in different geographies because this is spread across the world. So in different geographies, it kind of shuts down and then maybe a year later, someone revives it or something. So it kind of works, but it's very low touch. Like it's maybe one event every 2 months, like a dinner, and people pay for their own dinner. Like they just gather and so on. So there is, or, guys, I'm going to a theater play. Who wants to join? That kind of thing. So it becomes more of a friends group with some membership criteria, but that's about it. So you can do things without revenue, but very light touch. The moment that you have an ambitious vision and people need to commit a lot of time, the cost of opportunity becomes really high. And so how do you justify that cost of opportunity for everyone involved?
Right. Yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you're just trying to build like a community and it doesn't require a lot of time investment, then you don't necessarily need to have money inflows. But as soon as you want to build something, you pretty much need some like way for people to pay the bills to be able to commit a lot of time.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you for coming on. So this week's challenge is to complete the DAO Canvas. So try to make progress on this and try to complete it. I took the first step on completing mine. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm also going to be a part of the program for building the DAO Accelerationism DAO, and I'm gonna try to complete the canvas. So yeah, that's the weekly challenge. Then next week we're gonna have another workshop with Daniel, where he will answer any questions that came up for you while you were trying to complete it, and take it to the next step. Other thing that we'll have next week is the first talk or panel that will be about going from 0 to 1 in starting a DAO, or a DAO-like project. It doesn't need to be a DAO from the first step, I guess. And we have a lot more coming on the weeks after that. So this is only the first one, and we have 7 more. So we have the next one will be going from 0 to 1. Then we have one about more like narrowing down the focus, which has been a big part of why DAOs failed, because a lot of people bring in a lot of ideas and then DAO spreads too thin. Then it will be about gathering feedback, so going out and talking to people and trying to make the DAO sustainable. Then we have one about picking the right tools for what you want to build. Then one about governance, one about the roles and the rewards, and the final one will be about finding the community or product market fit. So they will all be announced separately with the guests. So right now there is no guest assigned, or at least not publicly, to any of them. So keep an eye out on the Telegram group for the announcements. And please join the Telegram group. The last link kind of messes it up, even though I put space, but that's fine. So thank you, Daniel, and thank you everybody for coming on. Join us in the Telegram group and complete the challenge. Please complete the challenge. Complete the DAO Canvas. You will find it useful. And see you all next week.
Cool. Thank you very much.